What the man everyone dismissed as a broke, nobody was quietly worth more than the building they worked in. Nobody looks twice at a man in a faded gray hoodie. That was exactly the point. Landon Archer sat in the back corner booth of Archer and Company Roasters, his own cafe, though not a single person inside knew it, with a laptop bag slung over one shoulder and 3 days of stubble on his jaw. He'd traded his tailored suits for thrift store flannel, his leather shoes for scuffed sneakers, and his name for a forgettable one, Lane, he'd tell anyone who asked, which so far, nobody had. 2 weeks earlier, an anonymous email had landed in his inbox. You should see what happens at the 5th and Main location when the cameras aren't the only ones watching. It named no one. It offered no proof. But it had a weight to it, a specificity that made Landon's stomach turn. He'd built Archer and Company from a single card on a college campus into 43 locations across the state, and he'd built it on one non-negotiable rule. Every person who walked through the door was worth the same cup of coffee, made with the same care. If that rule was being broken, he needed to see it with his own eyes, not through a report, not through a lawyer's summary, with his own eyes. So here he was, disguised in his own empire, watching. The store manager, a broad-shouldered man named Grant Holloway, moved the cafe like he owned more than just a schedule. He had a magnetic, customer-facing smile. Landon had seen it flash on for a woman in a blazer ordering a caramel macchiato, and a scowl that came out the second the customer's back was turned to relay a complaint about the milk. Landon watched Grant serve 4 white customers in the time it took him to ignore one black man standing patiently at the counter, phone in hand, waiting to be acknowledged. The man cleared his throat. Grant glanced at him, then turned to restock cups that didn't need restocking. 90 seconds passed before another barista, a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous energy, hurried over to take his order herself. "Sorry about the wait," she said, genuine apology in her voice. "What can I get started for you?" Landon logged the barista's name from her tag, Ellie. He opened a blank note on his phone, thumbs moving slowly like a man texting a friend, and typed, "Day 1, 9:47 a.m. Manager ignored black customer approximate in 90 seconds. Barista Ellie intervened. It wasn't proof of a pattern yet. One morning wasn't a verdict. But Landon had learned long ago, back when he was scraping together rent working double shifts himself, that character shows itself in small moments, the ones people think no one is grading. He ordered a plain coffee, paid in cash, and left $1 in the tip jar. Grant didn't so much as look at him. Just another guy in a hoodie, easy to overlook, easy to forget. Exactly what Landon needed him to think. By early afternoon, the cafe had filled with the after-lunch rush. Office workers, a couple of students with laptops, a mother juggling a toddler and a diaper bag. Landon nursed his coffee at a corner table. Phone propped up like he was scrolling, ears tuned to every register beep and murmured order. That's when Dolores Hampton walked in. She was maybe 70, moving carefully with a cane, a soft blue cardigan buttoned to her chin despite the mild weather outside. She approached the counter with the unhurried patience of someone who'd learned not to expect the world to rush for her. She asked politely for a decaf with cream. Grant didn't even look up from his phone. "We're out of decaf." Landon frowned. He'd personally approved the inventory order for this location 3 days ago. There was no way they were out. Dolores nodded, disappointed but gracious, and asked if she might sit for a few minutes to rest her hip before heading back out into the heat. "Tables are for paying customers," Grant said flatly. The words landed like a slap across the quiet cafe. A few heads turned. Dolores's face didn't crumble. She clearly weathered worse. But something in her eyes dimmed, like a woman deciding once again that this was simply how the world was going to treat her. Landon's jaw tightened. Every instinct in him wanted to stand up right then, announce who he was, and end it on the spot. He didn't move, because if he blew his cover on day 1, he'd only ever see Grant's performance for corporate cameras. He needed to see what happened when no one thought they were being watched at all, and something told him this was only the surface of what Grant Holloway was hiding behind that customer service smile. She thought no one saw what happened to her that day. She had no idea the most powerful man in the room was sitting 6 feet away, watching everything. Dolores Hampton turned to leave, and it was Ellie who moved first. "Ma'am, wait." Ellie called out, already reaching for a chair at the small table near the window. "We actually do have decaf. I just brewed a fresh pot in the back. Please sit. It's on me." Grant shot her a look sharp enough to cut glass, but Ellie didn't flinch. She guided Dolores to the seat, brought her the coffee with a little extra cream on the side, and crouched down to chat with her for a moment about the weather, about her hip, about nothing important at all, the kind of nothing that makes a person feel like a person again. Landon watched this exchange with his throat tight. This was the story his company should have been known for. Instead, it was buried under whatever else was happening in this building. He stayed until closing that first day, nursing 2 more coffees he didn't need, watching Grant's behavior calcify into a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. A Latino father bringing his daughter in for a birthday treat was told, incorrectly, that the register was having issues and he'd need to pay in exact cash, a rule that applied to no one else that day. A group of black college students studying at the corner table were asked, twice, if they were planning to buy anything else, despite having ordered lattes and pastries less than 40 minutes earlier. Meanwhile, a table of white businessmen who'd been camped out with a single share coffee for over 2 hours got a friendly refill offer. None of it, on its own, would hold up as proof of anything in a courtroom or corporate review. That was the insidious genius of it. Deniability stitched into every interaction. But Landon had eyes for patterns. He'd built a business on reading rooms, reading people, reading what numbers didn't say. And what he was reading here was a manager who'd built a private fiefdom, confident that no one above him would ever sit still long enough to notice. He was wrong about that. He just didn't know it yet. That night, back in the modest extended-stay hotel room he'd booked under a different name, Landon opened his laptop and pulled the store's financial reports. Something else had been nagging at him since the decaf lie. Inventory numbers that didn't track with what he'd seen on the floor. He cross-referenced shift schedules against payroll disbursements for the last quarter. It took him 2 hours to find it, but once he found it, it was unmistakable. Grant Holloway had been submitting hours for 2 employees who, according to the schedule logs, hadn't worked in over 5 months. The payments were still going out, small enough now to trigger an automatic audit flag, a few $100s every 2 weeks, but consistent enough that over 5 months, it added up to nearly $6,000 quietly funneled into accounts Landon didn't recognize. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Discrimination against customers was a moral catastrophe. This was also, plainly, a crime. Landon thought about calling his head of HR right then, his lawyer, any of them could have this handled by morning. Grant escorted out by security before the cafe even opened, but something held him back. If he ended this cleanly and quietly through corporate channels, Grant would simply disappear into a severance agreement, a footnote, a name nobody remembered. Ellie's kindness would go uncelebrated. Dolores would never know that someone had actually seen what happened to her. The employees, currently too afraid to speak up under Grant's intimidation, would learn only that management handled it, not what justice actually looked like. Landon closed his laptop and made a decision. He needed more, not for a legal case. He already had enough of that. He needed enough truth, laid bare in front of everyone who'd witnessed it, that no one in that cafe would ever again wonder whether cruelty had consequences. He set his alarm for 6 a.m. day. 2 was going to be longer. He'd been recording for 3 days when Grant said the 11 words that would end his career, and he had no idea the microphone was catching every single one. By day 2, Landon had learned the rhythms of the store, like sheet music. He knew that Grant took his real 15-minute break at 10:15, disappearing into the back office to scroll his phone. He knew that the assistant manager, a soft-spoken man named Marcus, seemed to wince every time Grant raised his voice, like a man who'd learned it was safer to shrink than to speak. He knew that Ellie arrived 20 minutes before every shift, unpaid, just to make sure the espresso machine was properly calibrated for the morning rush. A small, unglamorous devotion nobody had asked her for and nobody thanked her for. And he knew their rotation of regular customers had started quietly avoiding this location altogether. He overheard 2 women at a nearby table, waiting for their order, trade a knowing look before one murmured, "I only come here because it's close to the office. I'd never come on purpose." That comment alone should have been a 5-alarm fire for any manager who cared about the business he ran. Grant clearly didn't. By mid-afternoon, Landon positioned himself near the supply closet under the pretense of needing an outlet to charge his phone, a request Ellie happily accommodated, unaware she was being kind to the one man who could change her entire life. From there, close enough to the thin employee break room wall, Landon could hear Grant on a call, voice pitched low, but not nearly low enough. "Look, I told you it's under the radar. Corporate doesn't audit line items like that. Not for a store this size. Sarah and DeAndre haven't worked here since February, man, but their names are still clocking hours on paper. Split's the same as always. You get your cut, I get mine. Everybody stays quiet." Landon's pulse spiked. He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb finding the voice memo app he'd quietly enabled 2 days earlier, praying the audio was clean enough to be usable. He didn't dare move closer. He didn't dare breathe loud. If anyone from the district office ever asks, tell them Sarah's on medical leave. DeAndre transferred. It's not that complicated. This place makes so much money nobody up top even looks at us twice. The call ended. Landon exhaled slowly, heart hammering, and played back 3 seconds of the recording just to confirm the audio had captured Grant's voice clearly. It had. He had it. Actual, unambiguous proof. Not just a discrimination he'd have to argue was a pattern, but flat, spoken confession to payroll fraud. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt sick. This was still, underneath all of it, a person he'd hired, a person he'd trusted enough to hand the keys to one of his flagship stores. Somewhere along the way, that trust had curdled into entitlement and entitlement into cruelty, and Landon couldn't shake the question of how long this had been happening at other locations, under other managers, while he sat in boardrooms reviewing quarterly growth charts instead of the ground truth of his own company. He found Ellie afterward, restocking napkin dispensers, humming quietly to herself. "You're really good at this," Landon said, still in character as Lane. "The way you handled that older woman yesterday, that was kind." Ellie shrugged, a little embarrassed. She didn't do anything wrong. People deserve to be treated decently. Shouldn't be a big thing. "It is a big thing," Landon said quietly. "More than you know." Ellie gave him a curious look, but the espresso machine hissed behind her, and she was pulled back into the current of the shift. Landon watched her go, already certain of one decision. He hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. Whatever happened to Grant, Ellie's story was going to end very differently. That night, Landon called his COO for the first time since this all began. "I need the district VP and head of HR at the 5th and Main store, Friday morning, 9 sharp, he said. And I need it to look like a routine visit. Nobody tips off the store manager. Nobody. Everything all right, Landon?" "Not yet," he said, "but it's about to be." One elderly woman just wanted to buy a birthday cake for her granddaughter. What happened next would be the final piece of evidence Landon needed. Day 3 brought Dolores Hampton back through the door, and this time she wasn't alone. She came in holding the hand of a girl who couldn't have been older than 7, both of them dressed a little nicer than an ordinary afternoon called for, matching the small, careful joy of someone celebrating something. Landon caught the tail end of Dolores telling the girl, her granddaughter, that they'd come here for a treat because it was her birthday and grandmother's got to pick the best spots in town. She approached the counter to order a slice of the seasonal berry cake from the display case, along with 2 hot chocolates. Grant was working the register. He glanced at the display case, then at Dolores, and said without hesitation, "That cake's actually reserved for another order. Sorry, it wasn't." Landon had glanced at that same display case not 10 minutes earlier. 3 full slices sat untouched behind the glass. Dolores's face fell, but she recovered quickly, the way people do when disappointment has become a familiar language. "Oh, all right. Maybe just the hot chocolates then, please." "We're actually closing the kitchen early today for cleaning," Grant said, already looking past her toward the next customer in line, a young white couple who just walked in. "Might want to try somewhere else." The lie was so casual, so unbothered, that for a moment Landon simply couldn't process it. He watched Grant turn immediately to the couple behind Dolores with bright, warm, "Welcome in. What can I get started for you, too?" as if the elderly woman and her granddaughter had already evaporated from the room. The little girl tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, I thought we were getting cake." "We'll find somewhere even better, sweetheart," Dolores said gently. already turning to leave, her voice steady for her granddaughter's sake, even as Landon could see her hand tighten around the girl's small fingers. Something in Landon went very quiet and very still. He had watched 3 days of small cruelties accumulate into an unmistakable pattern. He had a recorded confession of fraud sitting in his phone. He had watched a woman turn away from a birthday cake in front of her own grandchild for no reason beyond the color of her skin. He thought of every value his father had drilled into him back when Archer and Company was a single cart and a stack of unpaid bills. You can tell everything about a man by how he treats someone who can't do anything for him. And he thought about how thoroughly that value had been betrayed under his own company's name. Landon stood up. For the first time in 3 days, he didn't hesitate. He walked toward the door just ahead of Dolores and her granddaughter and said gently, "Ma'am, please, wait just one moment." Dolores turned, a little wary, a little tired. "Yes." "Please, sit back down. Whatever you like, the cake, the hot chocolate, anything on the menu. It's taken care of. I promise you." He crouched slightly to address the little girl directly. "And happy birthday. I think we can do a lot better than somewhere else." Dolores studied him, this stranger in a worn hoodie who seemed to be speaking with far more authority than his clothes suggested. Something in his voice made her pause. "That's very kind of you, but—" "Please," Landon said again, softer. "Just 5 more minutes. I promise it'll be worth it." He turned toward the counter, pulled out his phone, and made the call he'd been holding on to since Wednesday night. "It's time," he said. "Come now." Grant thought he was about to fire a homeless-looking man for causing a scene. He had no idea he was about to lose everything in front of the entire cafe. Grant noticed commotion by the door and came around the counter, his customer service mask sliding smoothly into place. "Sir, is there a problem?" "There is," Landon said, still calm. "But it's not with her. It's with you." Grant's smile flickered, confusion creeping in at the edges. "Excuse me." Before he could say more, the front door chimed and 3 people walked in with the unmistakable posture of executives. Press suits, badges clipped to their belts, expressions that made the entire cafe go quiet. Landon recognized every one of them. His COO, Rebecca Chun, the head of HR, Marcus Webb, and the district vice president, a stern woman named Alicia Ford who oversaw 12 locations across the region. Grant's face went pale. "Ms. Ford, I wasn't told about a corporate visit today. I would have—" "That's exactly why we didn't tell you," Alicia said flatly, her eyes moving past Grant to Landon. "Mr. Archer." The words landed on the cafe like a thunderclap. A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the room. The barista at the register froze mid-order. Ellie, restocking cups near the pastry case, turned so fast she nearly dropped the tray in her hands. Marcus, the assistant manager, went perfectly still, his eyes darting between the man in the hoodie and the executives now flanking him. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. I don't understand." Landon reached up and pulled the hood back from his head, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time in 4 days, let himself stand the way he actually stood in boardrooms. Shoulders back, voice steady, unmistakably a man used to being listened to. "My name is Landon Archer," he said, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "I founded this company 12 years ago on a single principle, that every person who walks through our doors is treated with dignity, no exceptions, no excuses. I've spent the last 4 days sitting in this cafe, watching what actually happens here when you thought no one important was paying attention." Grant's face cycled rapidly through disbelief, panic, and something close to nausea. "Mr. Archer, sir, I can explain." "You already have," Landon said and held up his phone. "I have 4 days of documented incidents where you ignored, humiliated, and lied to customers based on the color of their skin. I have this afternoon, on record, where you turned away a woman and her 7-year-old granddaughter from buying a birthday cake that was sitting untouched in your display case." He turned the phone slightly. "And I have a recording of you on a call yesterday afternoon, confessing to falsifying payroll records for 2 employees who haven't worked here since February, Sarah and DeAndre. Would you like me to play for everyone?" The color drained entirely from Grant's face. Somewhere near the counter, Marcus exhaled a long breath he seemed to have been holding for months. This is a misunderstanding," Grant stammered, but the words had no weight behind them anymore. Everyone in the cafe could see it. Alicia Ford stepped forward, her voice cold and procedural. Grant Holloway, you are terminated, effective immediately, for violations of company policy, employee misconduct, and financial fraud. Corporate security will escort you to collect personal items. The matter of the falsified payroll records will be referred to legal counsel for further action. 2 security personnel Landon hadn't even noticed enter appeared at the door. Grant looked around the cafe, at the customers who'd stopped pretending not to watch, at Ellie standing frozen by the pastry case, at Dolores sitting quietly with her granddaughter near the window, and for the first time in 3 days he had absolutely nothing to say. The man everyone had overlooked for 4 days was about to give away more than anyone in that cafe had ever expected. But the biggest surprise wasn't the money. The cafe stayed hushed as Grant was escorted out, the door chime marking his exit like a small, quiet punctuation mark on 4 days of cruelty. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Landon turned to the room and let his voice soften. "I'm sorry," he said, to everyone and no one in particular. "This is not who we are supposed to be. And I promise you, starting today, it isn't who we're going to be." He walked to Dolores' table first and knelt down slightly to speak to her granddaughter, whose birthday cake had, in the chaos, been entirely forgotten. "I believe someone here still owes you a birthday cake," he said gently, and nodded to a barista, who hurried to cut the largest slice from the case. "Mr. Archer," Dolores said, her voice unsteady, "you didn't have to do all this for us." "I didn't do it for you," Landon said honestly. "I mean, I'm glad I could. But I did it because I needed to know the truth about my own company, and you helped me see it clearly. That's a debt I can't really repay with cake. But we'll start there." He turned next to Ellie, who was still standing by the pastry case, eyes wide, clearly tried to process that the quiet, hoodie-clad customer she'd shown kindness to all week was, in fact, the founder of the company she worked for. "Ellie," Landon said, "I watch you treat every single person who walked through that door with more decency than I've seen from managers running entire regions. You stayed unpaid before every shift to fix a machine nobody asked you to fix. You defended a customer twice your manager's confidence, at real risk to your own job." He glanced at Rebecca and Alicia, who both nodded. They clearly already discussed this. "As of this morning, this store needs a new manager. I can't think of anyone better suited for it than you." Ellie's hand flew to her mouth. Are you serious?" "Completely," Landon said. "The store's culture starts with whoever holds that title. I want to start with someone who already knows how to lead with kindness instead of fear." Marcus, the assistant manager, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Archer, I should have said something. About Grant. I saw it too for months and I didn't." "You're staying on as her assistant manager," Landon said, cutting off the apology gently but firmly. "You'll do better next time. That's enough for today." In the weeks that followed, the 5th and Main location underwent more than a staffing change. Landon personally reviewed customer complaint records across all 43 stores and quietly initiated audits at 3 other locations where similar patterns had gone unreported. 2 more managers were let go. A new anonymous reporting system was built directly into the employee app, reviewed weekly by someone outside store management entirely. But the change people talked about most wasn't a policy. It was a chair. Landon had a single armchair installed near the window of every Archer & Company location, with a small brass plaque beneath it that read, "Reserved for whoever needs it today. No purchase required. No time limit. Just a seat." And the promise that whoever sat in it would be treated exactly like anyone else who walked through the door. Dolores became something of a regular after that, often bringing her granddaughter in on weekends, always greeted warmly by name. Under Ellie's management, the 5th and Main store climbed from the lowest rated location in the company to the highest within 6 months. Its reviews filled with the exact word Landon had built his entire company around, the word Grant had so thoroughly forgotten: welcome. Landon never wore the hoodie into that cafe again. There was no need to hide anymore, but he kept it, folded in a drawer in his office, a quiet reminder of 4 days that taught him more about his own company than any quarterly report ever could. Because the truth was simple, even if it was easy forgetting boardrooms and balance sheets. Character isn't revealed by how you treat the people who can do something for you. It's revealed by how you treat the people who, as far as you know, can't do anything for you at all.